Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Keith and this is Julie, and we're Paradigm Media. A while back, we did actually here at home, we were doing a study, I guess a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we started a new Torah portion, which is every year we start over reading through the entire Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, 5 books of Moses, the Humash, um, usually better known as the Torah. And so we started over in Genesis or Bereshit. And so we had some folks here and we're going through having kind of a discussion. There's so much to talk about that on that subject. We do have a video available. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it's something about does the Bible support evolution? And it goes into some things about Genesis. But we ended up kind of on a topic recently more of tying the end to the beginning of Revelation, dealing with Revelation and Genesis in both of those books and showing the connection because, and most people don't understand that when people want to understand about the last days or end time events, and we did a video a while back. I forget the name of it. Something about are we in the last days? I think was the name of it. Basically, what it dealt with. But when people want to investigate or know more about the last days, they typically, if they want to do their own biblical research and their own study, usually they turn to the end of the book, to the book of Revelation. They start there trying to understand things. But scripturally, the whole idea scripturally is very different and is very antithetical in many ways to that thought process. And that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today. In the book of Isaiah or Yeshayahu, chapter 46, let's start at verse 9 here. It says, "Remember the former things of old. I am God and there is none else. I am God and there is none like me." The operative verse, verse 10, Isaiah 46:10, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, "My counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure." So it says here that God declares the end from the beginning. And a similar thought process, a well-known axiom within Judaism, and particularly more of the mystical Judaism, is the end is wedged in the beginning and the beginning is wedged in the end, which is a really weird concept. So if God has declared the end from the beginning, earlier I said we started a new Torah portion a couple weeks ago. In Hebrew, the name of that book, the first book of the Bible, Genesis, is called Bereshit, and Bereshit means in the beginning. And so God has declared the end from in the beginning, from Bereshit. We could think of it that way. Or in modern parlance, we could say God has declared the end from Genesis. Now, it's interesting to me, and I think that this isn't exactly our topic, but it ties right in pretty well. If God has declared the end from the beginning, and there is a direct connection between the beginning and end, and if it is true that the end is wedged in the beginning and the beginning is wedged in the end, what is another way to say that? What are some synonyms? Because I find this helpful for me, and I think it is for other people when we're talking about a concept, to use to start looking for synonyms, because we get so entrained into the familiar terminology of our tribe, of our particular, of our culture and cliques and whoever we hang around with, particularly religious, and we get used to certain terminology. If we can shake that up a little bit, it makes a big difference in how we can understand it.
I agree. Well, it kind of seems to jump the track a little bit of that we always go down when we think of something, which is limiting if you stay on that track. And referencing it a different way, like you're saying, kind of causes you to jump the track and go off into the bushes a little bit. It's not a well-worn thing. You're seeing it a different way with a different perspective when you use a different word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it helps.
That's true.
Seeing it a little bit different way. Sorry, we're both a little froggy. Or I'm froggy.
It's okay. Got choked up, I
Yeah,
guess.
I get all the laughing.
So, if we were to explore this further, the idea of the end being declared from the beginning, and the idea of the beginning and end being wedged together, and think about maybe, well, I'm thinking about the Ouroboros
Mm-hmm.
of the snake or the dragon swallowing its own tail.
It's a
sort of,
popular symbol.
yeah, which is basically that shows the end and beginning wedged within itself in this idea of dualities, a connection between these dualities of day and night, dark and light, male and female, and on and on. But we don't normally think in our culture about the beginning and end. What are some synonyms that we could explore about this idea using different words than beginning and end? What are some different ways of saying that?
I'm not coming up with much.
Okay, well, the end of something signifies a death
Mm-hmm.
or a finality, a conclusion to things, but we could think of it as a death. And a lot of times, we talk about how people just have been conditioned to run to a destination in their mind. They get primed, we do. We get primed to think of a certain way. So most people, if we were to say, what is the opposite of death, you would say,
Life.
most people would say life.
Most people would say life.
That's really not exactly correct. And on some level, yeah, we could contrast it and see it as being as opposites, but the book of Ecclesiastes says there's a time to be born and a time to die.
Mm-hmm.
So really the idea, because a birth is a beginning and an origin.
Yeah.
And all these things are time
sense.
sensitive. So you could say that using synonyms for the end being embedded in the beginning and the beginning being embedded in the end, we could think of that as death and birth.
Mm-hmm.
And if we stated it that way, the birth is embedded in the death, and the death is embedded in the birth.
Which is not as troublesome of an idea when you think about it having to be that way in this realm.
Mm-hmm.
Because life, my opinion, life doesn't start at birth. You're just born into this realm. Because whatever happens before God, creating a soul, or whatever happens before all of that, knowing you and when you were in your mother's womb and just different things. I mean, there's a lot there that gives support to the fact that something's going on before we're born into this world. But when we're born into this realm, birth and death. But then life, which is really a spiritual concept, I mean, it runs throughout everything here and keeps all creation going. But all of creation is created because life exists outside of this dimension. So it's not really a troublesome idea to me that to think that birth is the opposite of death, and life kind of has no opposite, because life to me is God, who has no opposite. People will say the devil's the opposite of God. No, he's not.
No.
God had, there is none beside me, he says.
Another good example of the way people think. They think about God and the devil being opposites, but God doesn't have an opposite. He is. And it's creation that has the opposites and dualities, but he is not that. But yeah, a lot of people think that. I mean, and that's really ludicrous when you begin to think about it, that the devil is just a part of the creation, a little speck.
I mean, and he's an adversarial force.
Yeah.
That's pitted against the kingdom of God.
Nothing to be trifled with.
But to say God's opposite, that's ridiculous. No. Yeah.
So exploring this idea, let's do it this way. Let's go to let's go to Revelation chapter 8. And so, what I want to kind of show here is that a lot of times, again, there's this disconnect. And when people are looking at Genesis, they just get myopic, or whatever section you're looking at. The book of Revelation, you're thinking the future, you're thinking prophecy, eschatology. Most people aren't thinking Genesis.
No.
But again, God has declared the end from the beginning. And so when you're reading Genesis, it's a good idea to think about the last book, the book of Revelation, or vice versa. And over time, you will begin to see how this transforms your thinking. And a lot of the Bible in the whole ways of God begin to make a lot more sense.
Well, and there's precedent in this, in what Yeshua says, I am the Alpha, or I am the Aleph and the Tav, the Alpha and the Omega. So he's identifying himself as a beginning and as an ending, and obviously everything in between. But there's a precedent. I am both. I am beginning and end. And so that speaks of dimensional God and his divine kingdom and his purposes being outside of this dimension, but working through it. Beginning, middle, end. So the precedents are there for what you're saying.
Exactly. And I want to do some videos. I don't know, in the future, maybe soon. I've got all these ideas and things that we want to do that we talk about. There's just so many things, and sometimes it's difficult to schedule it in. But I want to do some videos delving into time, and particularly biblical paradigms of time. But
that'd be interesting.
But this is a little bit like this. It touches on the theme a little bit, but it's not really exactly in that direction that I'm looking at. So let's get Revelation chapter 8, verse 7. And so chapter 8 starts out with these 7 seals. And something else I want to do is maybe start going through Revelation. And I think that people would really get into some of these conversations of going through the book of Revelation and looking at these things on a different level, in a vastly different way than you probably have been exposed to in the past, because most of the time you hear the same old junk, and that's just hearsay, repeated, in many cases baseless interpretation. Not all of it, but a lot of it is.
And if it's the revelation of Yeshua HaMashiach,
or Jesus the Christ in English,
then if it's the revelation of him. And wasn't John told not to seal up the book? Like, I think Daniel, when he had a vision, was told to seal something up, seal up the book, because it wasn't time.
Daniel chapter 12.
And then John was told to make it known, publish it.
Right.
And there was something that he was told not to write down about the vision, but in terms of the whole vision itself, make it known, publish it. And so this is something to be known. We're not supposed to be in such ignorance of what Revelation is trying to show us. And my belief isn't that it's not crammed into just 7 years. And I think when you come at it with that paradigm that it's just the book of the tribulation, then you miss everything, because it's even whatever is future is part of the revelation of Yeshua, but it's not the totality of the revelation of Yeshua. So if that book is kind of a summary or whatever of all of his work in this realm, then it's not going to be confined to just a few years.
Yeah, and again, go back and check out our other video if you're interested in this kind of subject matter on Are We in the Last Days? And essentially we talk about that we have been in the last days for at least 2,000 years. And we lay out a case for that. And, when you have more of that paradigm that you're viewing prophecy through, a lot of it looks very different than the typical, very, again, myopic and tunnel vision, short and sweet interpretation of all of this.
And the whole point of looking at this stuff is to be aware and awake of what's coming. It's not just to be right or
what's coming and what's past, even.
yeah, but I mean, just to understand. It's not to just perpetuate a theology that we already believe. It's to really dig in. If anybody says they understand the whole book of Revelation, I'm sorry, either they're a prophet of God that he's totally talking to, or, you know, they're misguided or they're being deceitful. There's just too much there. And
There's
so
a
I
lot
think,
there.
yeah, there is a lot there. And I think going through, even doing, you know, you talk about doing the videos on Revelation. If we took like a chapter and did a video, you know, just a Revelation series,
We could do
that might be interesting to people.
The
Anyway.
challenge would be doing a whole chapter in
an hour.
Yeah, something like that would be
Yeah.
be very
It
difficult.
could be a summary.
Okay, so let's look at this one. Revelation chapter 8, verse 7. It says, in the second, or let's see, chapter 8, verse 7 of Revelation. The first angel sounded, that is his trumpet, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and a third part of the trees were burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. And the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. And a third part of the creatures that were in the sea that had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. Let's pause right here with the idea that we were talking about of God having declared the end from the beginning. I want you to think in those terms of move beyond just thinking about revelation and think about patterns, think about precedents, because the book of Genesis is a book of precedents. And so the first time that something happens, it sets a precedent and patterns for everything that will follow in the future in these cycles. Yeah, in the Bible, in Hebraic thinking. So let me emphasize some words here and see if this makes any difference. So the first angel sounded in there, because if you begin to really exercise critical thinking and you practice questioning things and not just assuming anything, and you really start dissecting this and you say, okay, what's going on here? There's 7 angels and they've got 7 trumpets in verse 6, and they're preparing themselves to sound. Okay. Some other time we'll get into maybe talking about the angels and trumpets and the precedents and what that's all about, because there's a whole lot to that. But let's just look at what's going on. They sound their trumpets. The first angel sounded. Notice it didn't just say one of them, it says the first one, and then it's the second angel, and so on, all 7 of them. And so the first angel sounds and something happens. So you've got to say to yourself, okay, what happened and what was affected? What was the target of this judgment? And so I'm going to emphasize it here. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. Okay, so, and by the way, you know, hail and the fire, if you go back, that is hail, H-A-I-L, with my southern accent, it might sound like I'm saying H-E-L-L, but
Winda.
yeah, if you go back and look at the Exodus, you will see a lot of these same plagues occurring there, in which God is pouring out judgments upon one nation, upon Mitzrayim or Egypt. Okay, only there's 10 plagues and things are in tens, and here they're in sevens. But if you go back and look in Genesis, there's a distinction between the first 3 and the last 7. The first 3 basically affected everyone, but after that third one, there was a distinction made between Goshen, the Hebrews, the Israelites living in that area, and the rest of Egypt. So basically there were 7 of them that totally targeted Egypt. Over here in Revelation, these are broken down into 7. That tells you the people of God aren't being targeted in these plagues. As it's not indiscriminate.
Yeah, no.
Okay, is another way maybe to say that. Secondly, just with that in mind, there is a number of passages in the Bible that says, according to the manner of the children of Israel coming out of Egypt, will this thing be that God is going to do. So, and again, God has declared the end from the beginning, and Ecclesiastes, that which has been will be again, and there is no new thing under the sun. So what occurred in Egypt, where God acted in a way like never before with the miraculous, is a foreshadowing in many respects of what would be done not to just one nation but all of the nations, because God is going to, it says, hiss for Ephraim, and that he's going to, the children of Israel have been scattered throughout the entire world, but in the last days it says that God will collect them, he will gather them out one by one, and he's going to pour out judgments upon those nations that are keeping his people in bondage, in captivity, spiritually and physically, much like what happened with Egypt.
That's scary.
Do you have anything you want to add on that?
No.
Well, that wasn't really, that was just kind of some afterthoughts about Egypt there, but it's important ones to keep in mind as well. So when we look here, the first angel poured out his vial, and what happened, it affected the earth. The second angel, it says, sounded in verse 8, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. I'm going to emphasize it. It was cast into the sea. So the sea is what's affected, the sea and the waters,
by the
second angel. Secondly, the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain was cast, burning with fire was cast in the sea. That tells you that someone had faith. Because Yeshua said, if you had faith like a mustard seed, you would be able to say to a mountain, be removed and cast into the sea. Mountains many times symbolically represent kingdoms, as we see in Revelation chapter 17, for example. And waters and seas and rivers and these kinds of tributaries and such represent peoples and languages and tribes and kindreds. Again, Revelation chapter 17 will show you there. So the first angel sounded, and it affected the earth. The second angel sounded, it affected the sea. And the third angel, it says, verse 9, and the third, or verse 10, and the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters, and goes on. The waters and rivers and things were the thing affected then. And so one more, let's do a couple more. In Revelation chapter 8 verse 12, the fourth angel sounded, and a third part of the sun was smitten, a third part of the moon, a third part of the stars. And then I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So there's a gap between the sixth trumpet being sounded and the seventh trump. You have to turn from chapter 8 to chapter 10 to get to the seventh trump. It drops off after the sixth, and it gives us different information. There is a greater length of time in terms of the space of the words separating. All of these others are just bam, 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 right, one right after another. Once the sixth one happens, there's a pretty big space before you get to chapter 10, and it deals with the seventh angel. Find that interesting. So almost as though maybe that things are being extended here a little bit. So Revelation chapter 10 verse 7, it says, but in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets. operative word, finish. So God has declared the end from the beginning. And if you go back and look at this now, all you've got to do now is go to the first page of your Bible in Genesis chapter 1, and what I just read will begin to make sense, hopefully. Because the things that are affected or targeted by these judgments, these 7 things, correspond directly to the order that they were made in Genesis chapter 1. So like day 1, within the period of day 1, we have God creating the heavens and the earth, and things fall from the heaven and target the earth. Day 2, we have most of the emphasis is on waters. So the second angel, what he does, it affects the sea. And the third angel, it affects the waters, because that's still what's going on. And then when it gets to the fourth one, it affects the sun, moon, and stars. Those things were brought into being on day 4. And then when we get to the 7th day, by the 7th day, God had finished the work which he had been doing. And so when we see the 7th angel blow his trumpet in Revelation chapter 10, verse 7, but in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished. And so it is the Sabbath, or the 7, is a completion, a finishing. Just like on the cross, Yeshua had 7 statements, and the final one was, it is finished, on the 7th, the Sabbath statement. You have anything so far?
Well, and I may be off base here. It's been a while since I read it. Isn't there a gap, or maybe that's just what teachers teach, but isn't there a gap in the week of Daniel? Or do they teach that there's a gap?
That is what most people say.
Okay.
In Daniel chapter 9, verse 25
They
to 27.
say there's a gap. But what's interesting is that
Perhaps.
there's a, like you're talking about the gap between the 6th and the 7th there.
Yeah.
And it just, I don't know. I'm just thinking like the last 2,000 years. And I mean, just thinking as thoughts occur to me.
Yeah.
Because it's all in the plan of God, and it's all going to come out exactly the way he said. But then there's some paradoxes to that we can't, I don't know how to quite reconcile, because like Yeshua said when he was here, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks under her wing, but you weren't willing." Which almost, to me, there's an implication that if they had received him then, then it would have gone a lot differently, and maybe they wouldn't have had the 2,000-year, being kicked out of their land and having to be dispersed through the nations, because I think it's all in the Torah where he lays it out, and he says, if you pick life, choose life, these are the blessings. If you sin, and you sin 7 times more, and you don't repent, and I do these things to you, and then you sin 7 times more, you'll sin, and I'll do this 7 times more to you. So there's a series of 7s there, and it's kind of like, this is up to Israel, even though God knows what's going to happen, but Israel, through her obedience or disobedience, just like Jerusalem, through embracing Messiah or not embracing Messiah, kind of caused the time to be a little, it's almost like an accordion, where if they had obeyed and received him, maybe there wouldn't have been them getting kicked out of the land for 2,000 years, and not a gap. At least, no, I don't know what would have unfolded or how that would have been exactly, but it just makes me think about this in Revelation, like where there's this pause. Is that, I don't know, like is there a built-in thing where God just says, and then they're going to determine how quickly this follows this. It's almost like a placeholder in some of the scriptures, like, he is sovereign, he does determine, but then we, within time, based on how we respond to God, have a part to play in how quickly or long term, how long we have to wait or not wait on something.
Which is something maybe we can do, another one that we need to do, is do a discussion talking about free will versus, as it's normally framed up, predestination or
Mhm.
the connection. How do those things work? Not that I can answer all of it,
Mhm.
but both of the things are true, and
Mhm.
that's the thing that you've got to realize, that you can't just pick one of the
No.
dualities or one of these things,
No.
because there's scriptures that, like free will and destiny, or law and grace, many of these
Well,
things, and that's what people do. They cherry pick
they do.
because the carnal mind is unable to reconcile and understand how both of these things that are seemingly opposites can be
Can be
true.
true. Well, and to me, it relates to the topic of the end from the beginning because,
Yes.
when you look at quantum physics and you look at other types of physics, and the scientists talk about parallel universes, and that seems kind of out there and crazy, but when you think about time and you think about choice, then the whole idea of, if we have free choice within the range that God gives us, within time, the idea of parallel universes makes sense to me, because if we make this choice, it would put us on this trajectory, which has to be possible within time. But if we make this choice, we get put on this trajectory. What if the parallel universes are, well, I know it sounds crazy, but what if they're all of the things and
Yeah.
choices that we could have depending on where we go? And I'm not just going off on a tangent. I'm saying the end from the beginning,
Yeah, that's true.
even within time, the end from the beginning, because God is sovereign, and it's just like the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Genesis. The end from the beginning is all there. The whole story is there. No matter whether they obey or disobey, the whole story and the whole ramifications of whatever choice they make is there. There's provision for whatever
In
choice
that
they
same
make.
tree are these dualities
Yes.
of life and death, and or
Yes.
birth and
Well,
death, and
exactly. And I mean,
beginnings and endings.
well, and it gets kind of thick
Mm.
to try to wrap your mind around. But I mean, when you think about quantum physics, or you think about the Garden of Eden and what God is having to
Right.
manage, then what you're just postulating is a much smaller, easier thing to kind of
I hope so.
bite-sized piece to me, to be able to illustrate and show that God's sovereign enough to declare the end from the beginning.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
His counsel will stand.
Yeah. Let's look at another example there. Yeah, that's really good on the the idea of the parallel universes and stuff like that, and we like talking about that's uh, that's a big topic all of its own that would
Yeah.
probably take
6
quite
years.
a bit of time. All right, Revelation chapter 16, verse 2. Now we're dealing with the vials or bowls of God's wrath. And I made a statement earlier. I said I was talking about the contrast between the judgments in Egypt or Mitzrayim with what we see in Revelation, that I believe is mainly targeting like the contrast of one nation being affected by the plagues,
Egypt.
Egypt, as opposed to what I believe is happening here, that it is uh, a lot of nations that are being affected. And I said something about that I believe that the target of these plagues here is not the people of God, but the others, the people in but I feel like an important caveat that needs to be made. In Revelation 17 and 18, it talks about this mystery Babylon, mother of harlots. And there's a statement made there. It says, "Come out from among her, my people, else you take part in her plagues." And so, and there's a parallel scripture in is it 1 Corinthians chapter? I can't remember. It's in one of the Corinthian letters, and Paul says, "Come out from among them," and a similar kind of thing, that you're not implicated and thus judged along with these people, just like we see again in the Torah with Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, that they were told, "Get away from the tents of these guys, else you perish with them." And so, if you're too close to the target of judgment, you can be affected by that.
Well,
if you're within
Lot's wife.
Yes, and so that's an important distinction that absolutely must be made. Okay, Revelation chapter 16. "And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying to the seven angels So here's these 7 angels again. Go your way and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. And I want to get in more in the future, talking about the angels and what are they doing, their mission, who are they. And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, just like what happened with the trumpets, just like the first day of creation. The second angel, verse 3, poured out his vial upon the sea. The third angel, verse 4, poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became blood. The fourth angel, now there's a little bit of a break here. Again, there's a separation here. Verse 8, the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun. And then it goes on. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the seventh angel. And again, there's a little bit of space, not as much as when we're talking about the trumpets. It says regarding the seventh angel, and obviously, for the sake of time, I'm running through a lot of this. I'm not reading everything or commenting on each of these verses, though I'd like to. But we got to kind of run through here, so keep this short. Verse 17, and the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, it is finished, or it is done. So the 7 or the Sabbath is going to deal with a type of completion, finishing, or cessation. And so the same type of pattern happens here. And again, go back to Genesis chapter 1, and you'll see that the things are judged in the order that they're brought forth in Genesis chapter 1.
Which is just like God.
Yes.
To be ordered and according to a pattern, not arbitrary,
Nothing
not like
is,
Zeus.
Nothing is random.
No, it's not willy-nilly.
Not one of these things
No.
is superfluous.
Right.
Not one of these things, is just, well, I think I'll target this or that. I mean, there's a structure and an order based upon the precedent and the original order that was laid out in the beginning, or Bereshit, because the end has been declared from the beginning.
Yes.
Now let's deal with another concept here, and
because we need more.
Yeah, there's so many of these, so we're just hitting on a few of these, and there's a lot of these kinds of things that maybe we'll get to. A friend of ours emailed me yesterday and had mentioned something, and it jogged my memory again to back a few weeks ago when we were looking at Genesis, and we were talking about some of these patterns of the end being declared from the beginning and such. So in the book of Psalms, chapter 84, verse 10, it says that one day in your courts are better than 1,000. So it's contrasting and comparing the concept of 1 with 1,000. In Psalm chapter 90, verse 4, he says 1,000 years are as yesterday in your sight. And now Peter, in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, and I want to read that one, 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, rather than just paraphrase it. Maybe.
It's a lot to get you going and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like my mind just kind of tickety. Like you put enough word in there, you start picking at this stuff.
Oh yeah, it's all connected.
It is. I mean,
so
it's like you it just starts.
You start looking at one little topic, and then all these other topics are connected.
Right.
So 2 Peter chapter 3 is talking about the day of judgment and the day of the Lord. It uses both of those terms. Verse 7 of chapter 3, but the heavens and the earth which are now, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Okay, and that's a pretty cool thing to get into here. But let me kind of stay on topic. Verse 8, but beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing. So that has to do with what he just said about this day of judgment, that these things being reserved for fire. That one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. And so there's a connection between one and 1,000, or a day and 1,000 years, between the micro and macro, between micro increments of time and macro increments of time. So looking at these things maybe as cyclically in these big wheels of time, and smaller, there's connections, just like we see with the, for example, the counting of the Omer between Passover and the Feast of Shavuot or Pentecost. You count for yourself 7 times 7 weeks. And then the next day, that's 49 days, the next day is the day of Pentecost or Shavuot. You can check out chapter 2 of Acts. That's what they were there for, was this festival. Well, likewise, on the more macro level, every 7 years is the Shemitah, or the sabbatical year. And then you count 7 times 7 cycles of sabbatical years. In the 50th year is the year of Jubilee, or the Yovel. So there's a connection between the little and the big, between above and below, between micro and macro.
Well, and that may seem a little overwhelming, but we get the topic. I mean, we understand the concept in our reckoning of time. We have seconds, which make up minutes, which make up hours, which make up days, which make up months and years and decades and centuries. And so you've got these little things, little within, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's the same concept.
Yeah, it is. Same thing. So God's declared the end from the beginning. 1,000 years are like a day. And Peter draws upon those places in Psalms, and he understands this. And he's talking about the day of the Lord, and he says, "But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that if you don't understand this concept of 1 and 1,000, the contrast and connection, that one day is 1,000 years and 1,000 years as a day." So both of those things are true. Sometimes people just focus upon one of those. Also, that big span of time is like a little span of time. The little span of time is like a big span of time.
Which is encased in the meaning of the first Hebrew letter, Aleph.
Which I was getting to. Great. Good.
Sorry.
No, that's perfect.
Well, it's got a numerical value of like 1, but then it can also be 1,000.
That's right.
And
that's exactly right.
Which doesn't necessarily make sense to my natural mind why that's so. But I mean, in the first character of the Hebrew alphabet, you've got the 1 or the 1,000, almost like the end or something else being embedded in the beginning.
That's perfect. Yeah, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the letter Aleph. And if you go to Psalm 119, most Bibles will show each of the Hebrew letters. That's an acrostic psalm. And so every 8 verses begin in Hebrew. In the Hebrew, the original Hebrew, every 8 verses all start with a particular Hebrew letter, the next 8 with the next one. So Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, all the way through the last letter, Tav. And you can see them, and you can see kind of a poor transliteration of how you pronounce them, but you can actually see how they look, how the characters look. So yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Aleph, because Aleph has a numerical value of 1, but it can also mean 1,000, because spelled the same way, basically, the word Aleph means 1,000. Interesting. God has declared the end from the beginning. There are 7 Hebrew words in verse 1 of the Bible, in Genesis 1:1. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. 7 words there. There happens to be this letter Aleph that Julie mentioned, that can be 1 or 1,000. There happens to be 6 of those in verse 1. There are 6 Aleph letters in verse 1, and God has declared the end from the beginning. Okay, and there's that could be a whole video by itself. But just like a menorah, just like that menorah behind us, it is also very much like the first verse in the Bible, the 7 first words. And so, yeah, it's the seven first words there, the menorah, the uh, the seven trumpets, seven vials. All of these things follow a pattern.
So are you about to say, because of the six alepphs, the six first letters of the Hebrew alphabet that appear in the first sentence or the first seven words, you're saying that maybe the aleph, which can be 1 or 1,000, and there's six of them, can represent 6,000 years
Yes.
of humanity and
Yes,
time
yes.
in this epic?
Yes. Now, if you check out our video on does the Bible support evolution, you will see that I do not believe the Earth is only 6,000 years, though I believe this current epoch or age has been 6,000 years since Adam. The Bible is very big on genealogies and giving you time frames.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you go through a lot of these things, these genealogies like in Chronicles and things like that, it can actually be pretty interesting after you get somewhat of a basis for this stuff. But what you will see with this concept in mind, God has declared the end from the beginning, and one day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years as a day, and so on. And so the last 6,000 years of human history, since the time of Adam, there's been right at 6,000 years, okay?
Mm.
And these 6,000 years since Adam parallel or mirror the micro, if you want to think of it that way, or of the history of what's going on. Again, these genealogies are very very well laid out. And so if you look at the first day of creation, the second day of creation, just like they've been judged, human history goes through a similar process of that. Okay, let me give you a couple of examples. Again, I'm going to try to tie this together real quick, and maybe you can on your own time later, you can do your own studies into these things. So day one, we have these great divisions of things, and great divisions of there's a lot of chaos, and God begins the process of bringing things into order, and light appears. But then it's believed by most of the rabbis that light then is once again concealed, this primordial light. The light is different than the sun, moon, and stars that occurs on day 4.
Yeah.
The second day deals with which would be Monday, Sunday, Monday. The second day is the one day where it is not good. All the other days, and God saw that it was good. By the seventh day, it was told me, oh, very good. But day 1, Monday, He didn't say it was good.
Day 1
because
or 2?
Day
2.
2. Because all that's going on is basically division, and there's nothing really completed as such. And so this mirrors or parallels what's going on in the human history at that time. There's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of darkness, there's a lot of strife in things, and then from that God begins to bring order and structure and clarity, and begins to really build from this thing. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Abraham, we can look at these genealogies and we can see what year he was born from the time of Adam. From the time of Adam, Abraham was born in the year 1948.
That's crazy.
So a lot of you students of history that understand about Bible prophecy and history of the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel was reborn in the year 1948.
And that is not a coincidence.
No, it's
I'm
not
sorry,
at all.
it's just not. People can say what they want to. It's a sign.
Yes. And so 1948, he would be toward the end of that second day, as the third day is beginning to blossom. And he goes into that third day, and then the descendants of Abraham begin to proliferate like seeds. And that's a big emphasis with Abraham, is that I'm going to do all this with your seed. And so day 3 deals with the seed and the proliferation of all of the seeds and things producing after their kind, and all of this massive growth, exponential growth happening there. And Day 4, as we've mentioned, the sun, moon, and stars and those kinds of things occur on day 4. It was on day 4, the 4,000 years, that Yeshua, the Messiah, the light of the world, was brought forth. Just like that fourth, or the center lampstand in the menorah back there, or that fourth word in Genesis 1:1, which is the Aleph Tav, the first and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. I know we're trying to cram a lot of things into this, but let me get just a couple more things here and we'll call it good. Because in Revelation chapter 13, building upon this same theme, and I know a lot of you are familiar with, or you've heard probably about this chapter. It's probably the most famous chapter in Revelation, or certainly one of them. It says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy." Okay, so what we got here in Revelation chapter 13 is a beast that crawls up out of the sea. Well, again, when you understand that the end has been declared from the beginning, there is an order and structure to all of this. Because it is on day 5 that God says in verse 20 of chapter 1 of Genesis, "And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that has life, the fowl that flies above the earth and in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly." Okay, and by the way, the word whales there in this translation is the word tanin. And if you cross-reference that with like Ezekiel chapter 29 verse 3, there in the King James it's translated dragon. So using that same term, on day 5, from the waters or sea arose great dragons. Revelation 13, we have a beast that is a water type creature that comes out of the water. That happens the 5th day.
Same day.
Okay. Now there's a beast that crawls out after that. Now this first beast comes out from the sea. The second beast, it says, verse 11 of chapter 13, "I beheld another beast coming out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon." Okay. Now we're in the 6th day, because the land animals, the animals that came out of the earth, are brought forth on the 6th day, just like the second beast. All of these things follow the 7-day pattern of history and of creation that is, and I know there's a whole lot we really need to unpack with this, but
yeah, but it's just the concept, because you think it's willy-nilly. Like Genesis, a bunch of stuff happened to a bunch of people, the patriarchs and all that, and then all this time, whatever it is, and then Revelation is some future book, and there's not really a whole lot of connection.
Yes.
BS, there is.
Yeah.
And it's according to pattern, just
That's
like
right.
you're saying. So it's kind of comforting to know that, because then when you start seeing pattern in the scriptures and you understand what it's based on, first of all, you can start to have faith that God has a plan. I mean, and people say that he does. Well, who can know it? It's, who knows the will of God? Well, and I understand there's plenty of things we're not going to know that's inside his head and heart. But he's laid out a lot of things in his word and by what he's done that we can start to, like what you're saying, we may not know what it means that the beast crawls up out of the sea. But if you understand that in Genesis there's a pattern that they were created in, and then you see in Revelation that there's a pattern where they're judged in, and it matches the pattern they were created in, then you start, for me, it starts to birth faith in me that God really is faithful, and it's not just something we say. He's faithful because he has been working this thing the whole time behind the scenes, and that there are provisions in the scriptures that if we have eyes to see and we just start, not necessarily to predict future events per se, But if you know the patterns of creation and you know,
Behold, I've told you before.
yes, right, and you know the pattern of what day, and if one day is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years is one day, and then you start taking the first 1,000 years, second 1,000 years, 3,000 years, like forth when Yeshua came, and then the 2,000 years after Yeshua, and understanding where we are in human history, and you start looking back in Revelation, you can start to see
We're toward the
things
time
unfold.
of the end of the sixth day.
Yeah, we are.
And on the sixth day in Genesis, we have mankind brought forth and proliferate in the earth. But specifically, they were created male and female in the image of God. And so, which is another thing we'll get to maybe in the future sometime on that concept of the masculine and feminine attributes. But for just a moment, realize that the manifestation of the image of God in the earth on the sixth day. And so the Yeshua being the express image of God, and that we are supposed to be transformed into that same image. And that, but first what happened was that first man, a unconsciousness and a sleep was put upon him, and then he arose, resurrected from that sleep on the sometime on the sixth day. Then we have the seventh day, or the Sabbath. And so there's a lot in the whole topic in itself, but the scripture talks a lot, particularly in Genesis, like the manna, for you guys that are familiar with the manna. The manna was a test to test the obedience of the people.
And the endurance.
To see if they would believe God or not.
Yeah.
And he said, gather the manna, or the bread from heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Yeshua, check out John chapter 6. Moshe gave you not that bread from heaven, but the bread of God is he that cometh down from heaven and giveth life unto the world. So the manna was to be gathered every day for 6 days. And on the sixth day you were to gather a double portion, so that you would be prepared for the seventh day, or the Shabbat, the Sabbath.
And that's interesting. Like, that deserves its own video where we might kind of talk about that, because it's like, you understand it. If the manna's fallen and it doesn't fall on the 7th, and you're told to get a double portion on the 6th because you're in the wilderness and God's giving you manna, that's easy to understand in a carnal way. If you don't gather, you don't eat. But symbolically, to understand what that means for us now as we go into or looking toward the 7th, what does that mean exactly? And how does that maybe tie into the parable of the 10 virgins who were waiting for the bridegroom and had to gather extra oil, or the ones that didn't have it?
The sixth day is preparation day.
Yeah.
Preppers.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
those that don't prepare for the Sabbath, like the 10 virgins, Matthew chapter 25, I think it could have been at that time. That's probably why they couldn't buy any oil, because all of the shops were closed for the Sabbath. And so it's important that we get prepared now, spiritually, physically, whatever you need to do. I hope that we've given you, opened up some new ways of seeing prophecy, new ways of seeing Genesis and Revelation, and maybe you can do some of your own studies and some of the things that we didn't have time to get to, and fill in some of these gaps. Hopefully we've filled in enough of them that you'll be able to figure out a lot of it yourself. Be sure and like and subscribe and comment below with your questions and comments, and if there's other themes or issues that you would like to see us tackle in the future, post them down below, and we'll maybe try to do that for you. All right, you guys take care, have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
See ya. But I'm the one controlling it, so.
Let's see. Look like I don't have no legs.
Don't have no legs? Well,
All right.
yeah. Everybody knows you have legs.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you didn't, it doesn't prevent your brain from working, so what's the problem? Just do the video.
Okay.
Okay.
5, 4, fee.
Fo fum, I'm the blood, smell the blood of an Englishman.
You're dumb.
No, I didn't make that up. It's from Jack and the
Yes.
Beanstalk. Okay.
All right.
Are you
Going
done?
live here.
Okay, we are live.
Okay. All right.
you're going to talk about. I'm just sitting here taking up space. Okay, I'm sorry.
Get it together.
Hey, if you like this video, please click like and subscribe to be notified whenever we release new content, and to help other people find us out there on the vast plains of YouTube land. If you have a question or a topic you'd like for us to do a video about, just leave it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Later, y'all.